Hello, my name is Julian Cargiatis, and this is going to be my reflection for week 2 of our food history class. So, the topic for this week is the Columbian Exchange, and basically, the Columbian Exchange was an exchange of food, people, and ideas between the Old World, which would be Europe, Asia, and Africa, and the New World, North and South America. So basically, this came to fruition through colonization from Europe going into South America and basically, colonizing uh, the Incans and the Mayans. Uh, and it basically changed everything we know about food and everything that people eat on a day to day basis, especially today. In terms of the short and long term, there were a lot of effects that it had, both good and bad. In terms of the short term, I would say it kind of leans a lot more towards bad. Europeans brought a lot of disease in to the Native Americans, and that was really a lot of the reason that they were able to colonize it so easily was because they brought these diseases in that had never been seen by Native Americans, and it kind of ravaged their population as well as their livestock. And then the other big short term effect, I would say, was a lot of the slave trade, uh, kind of like a lot of the slave trade that happened in the North and South America was due to the Columbian Exchange because all of these new crops needed people to work the plantations and work the fields. So they were shipping over a lot of slaves. Um, in terms of effects, both short and long term, I would say the introduction of food is one of those effects that matters a lot. For example, in page 40 of the Food and World History, Pilcher talks about how the Middle East began integrating American crops a lot earlier in the 16th century, but a lot of other parts of the world, like Europe and India, kind of ignored a lot of these crops, which is why I say it's kind of a short and long term, because in the short term, there were a lot of parts of the world that were using these crops, but in the long term, everybody was using a lot of these crops, and even today, everyone's eating pretty much like about half of what everyone's eating kind of comes from the New World. And then another long term would be kind of the birth of some of the biggest countries in the world today in terms of economic and social standpoints, uh, like the US and a lot of bigger countries in South America, Brazil, Mexico, and Central America. And so obviously, this process changed the world history of food a lot because so many foods came from North and South America. Uh, a lot of staple foods that we eat nowadays, like potatoes and corn and chocolates, all came from the Americas and were all crops that the Native Americans were farming. For example, in the AnthroChef podcast that we listened to this week, at around the 61-minute mark, the host was talking about how corn really completely changed the world because of its ability to be grown in less ideal conditions. Like dry areas like Africa were able to grow corn pretty easily, and definitely could be grown in a lot worse conditions than things like rice or wheat that the old world was really relying on a lot. And then he also goes on to comment about how potatoes may explain as much as 12% of the population increase, which basically can just be traced back to the Columbian Exchange itself. And then outside of foods like that, Europe kind of jump started the whole stimulant like revolution with coffee and tea because coffee came from the New World, and then the sugar people started putting in tea and everything. So there was a lot more influence with sweets coming to the old world from the new world. And yeah, that was my response for reflection 2. Thank you.